Welcome to The Creative Shift. My name is Dan Blank, author of the book Be the Gateway and founder of WeGrowMedia.com. Okay, so today I want to talk about how great design can teach us about building an effective author platform that can lead you to your goals as a writer or creator. And those goals are often this idea of understanding who you hope to reach and what engages them, and really developing a sense of trust and connection and community around what you create and share. The alternative title for this podcast is What We Can Learn from the World's Best Litter Box, about creating an effective author platform, because I want to share what feels like an odd and ridiculous story. But it was sort of surprising how many really useful lessons came out of it as I was writing this piece. Okay, so I have a good friend, Laurie Richmond, who is an author illustrator. I have interviewed her on this podcast, I think, multiple times. And she and her family have recently been renovating their home. They live in Brooklyn. They've been renovating their, as an apartment, a condo, I don't know the official term. And so they've been living in this, the family of four has been living in a one-bedroom apartment while their home is being renovated. And, you know, she shared that story on her Instagram, which, by the way, you can check out at Laurie Richmond Draws. And she's been sharing that process there and kind of behind the scenes updates to me as well, because we kind of chat pretty often about this. And there was one little area of the home that was really intriguing. So in the renovation, they're trying to solve for a lot of the issues they had living in their home. And anyone living in any kind of urban area, but especially Brooklyn or Manhattan, that sort of thing, where it's very expensive and you don't get a lot of space, it's not that difficult for a tiny problem to become a huge issue. So one of the things they were solving for was having the litter box for their cat, whose name is Mona, in their kids' bathroom. So the solution they came up with was this multi-part litter box area. And it's really kind of neat. I shared photos on my blogs. If you go to WeGrowMedia.com, go up to the blog, and then that post is called What Great Design Teaches Us About Building an Effective Author Platform. So the kitchen goes into a pantry area, and then what you notice is you look kind of through that corridor is this little, essentially a mouse hole in the bottom left of one of the large doors. And this is the entrance to the litter box region of the apartment. So the cat enters that hole. Then there's like a little pathway. The cat has to turn right. Then there's a second hole, a second mouse hole, where they turn left. And it goes into this very deep, large area that the covered litter box will be within. Now, this area is separated off. There's a large panel that the litter box sits behind. And the idea here is multifold. One is that the cat has a sense of privacy. And anyone who's ever had a cat knows this is very important for doing anything they want to do in the litter box. And also that because this is a family of four, it's going to be a busy home, that if someone is in that area of the pantry and they open the door, the cat is still behind a secondary door where the panel is. They also had this area in general shares space with the laundry, so it's a nice deep area. Again, anyone who's ever had a cat knows the bigger, having a nice size litter box is often preferable. And it was this really interesting design of thinking of the path that the cat would take to get here. So, and there's even little details like the shelving above, the shelves go all the way to the door. This idea that Mona would not be able to then enter the first little area and then jump up to the higher areas that she shouldn't be. So what you're probably thinking right now is, well, gee, Dan, this is great. What on earth does this have to do with me as a writer and a creator, what it means to share your work effectively? Where is design thinking coming into this? So I think it is, let's see, 5 lessons here. So the first is you have to consider how people become aware of your work and really enter your community. They enter the atmosphere that your work exists within. So in my book, Be the Gateway, I used the idea of a gateway being a metaphor. And the gateway operates as this idea that you build this gateway. Behind it is your whole platform, your writing, your books, your creative work, your art, your music, whatever it is, and what that whole world. But you craft this gateway, and the first thing you do is you walk out of the gateway into the world, because you have to identify who are the people you want to reach, and how are you finding paths that lead them to your gateway, and how are you ushering them through that. In my mind, I've always had this arched gateway, and I will say, now that I think about it, it looks in shape pretty similar to the hole that Mona will enter to get into her litter box. And it's a great metaphor, this idea of that entranceway, of what is the language and the context, the images, what are the ways that you get the attention of someone you hope to reach. And it's not always a logical thing. We've got to consider the emotional components here as well. So I just loved when you look down this beautiful brand new kitchen to a beautiful pantry, everything's new, it's really well thought out, that here was a very intriguing shape, and it was the right size, and it was in the corner. It was at an area of the apartment that could be very private at times. It's separated from the bedroom, separated from the bathrooms. It's near the kitchen, but not in the kitchen. But is also in an area where everyone can get at it. So just that idea of thinking about how do people become aware of your work? Have you given them a place to enter? The second is to ensure that people feel safe. I have often said that the idea of an author platform is two things. It's not your tweets and your social media or newsletter. It's about communication and trust. And trust is a big part of that. The idea of making someone feel welcome, of making them feel seen yet safe, you feeling seen yet safe is a really big part of that. How we each define safety might be unique to each of us, because some of it could be your comfort level, your experience, your preferences, and likewise for the audience that you hope to reach. But when I looked at what Lori and her husband had created, so much attention went into this idea of how would Mona feel safe? And that is something that is so critical with anything that you share, whether you create a newsletter or, follow me on Twitter or join this webinar. How do you make people feel seen and welcome and a part of something, whatever emotions you want them to feel, but also feel like there are good boundaries, there's high trust, all of that. The third, and this is really important, is to give people a clear progression. So often I'll see, let's say, a writer or artist, they're sharing, I want to be known for this kind of art with these themes. And then they share something that's kind of really aligned with that. And then for the next 29 days, they just share photos of flowers, which has nothing to do the way that they share them with what they want to be known for. Or you get them to, I just spent $4,000 designing my website. And you don't really know where to go. It's not really clear what you want people to do. So with the litter box, there's a clear progression. If you enter here, you make a right, then you step up, and there's a second door, and then this, and all of that. There's even little details I didn't mention, like I think there's going to be some kind of motion sensor light in the litter box area. But it's this idea of thinking of that progression. And there's two ways to look at this. One is to think about if someone just finds out about you, whether it's through word of mouth or through your book or through your art or through a tweet or through a newsletter, what's the next thing they do? Where are you leading them? What's the one thing you hope that they do? And then how are you keeping them there? So that progression. So if you're saying, I want more Instagram followers, well, what are you doing to lead people in? But then what are you sharing every day or every week or whatever that keeps people engaged with what you think that they want from you and what you've told them, hey, this is what I'm all about. The other thing is to make sure that you're not giving people a million off-ramps. Talk about this a lot. A web page that has a million different links, or a social media platform that is just always sending people to these random places. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It is a wonderful thing to be generous, sending people to other people's work. There's a whole platform you can build about curation. But be clear if that is the goal and how much you're doing it. And again, where you're leading people and where you are unintentionally almost encouraging them to wander away from your platform. Lesson 4 is to consider your goals of the reader. And this is funny, and this is where I think a litter box is a really fun metaphor, because to the cat, it's a really big deal to make sure they have a litter box, they feel safe, it lives up to whatever preferences they have, and cats are notoriously picky. And you can imagine to a human, this is not as big a deal. We know we have to offer this to the cat, but most people don't feel they have enough space in their house. They don't really want a box that will have this kind of stuff in it in their primary living area, so we tend to shove it places. And if you ever talk to a veterinarian, I've had cats for a better part of my life, they'll talk to you about what makes cats feel safe. If you go on cat YouTube, which I think is a thing, looking at people helping you deal with behavioral issues with a cat. And I've watched lots of these videos. You realize how complex it is for a cat. And what I like about that is so much of what I talk about is this idea of how do you identify your ideal audience, your ideal reader, and considering their goals, not just I want to sell more of my books, but well, what are their goals? What is it about your book that will intrigue them? What's a phrase that will lead them in? What will keep them in that area? What will get them to talk about the book? It's not about you just sharing quote unquote content. It's about you developing an experience for other people. And this really forces you to challenge your own assumptions and to test different ideas with what will engage people. See this again and again. Someone's, I've got a big idea of how people are going to learn about my new book. And then they try the idea, it doesn't really work. And then some random idea that they did like on a whim works really well. You've got to test these things. You've got to really keep your reader in mind for that. And the last big lesson here, and this one was huge, was that collaboration is a big part of success. So as I was writing this piece, I was trying to think of how many people were involved in designing this litter box, and how much is the total cost of the litter box. So for how many people were involved, there are first Lori and her husband. And it is worth noting that Lori is a trained designer, author, and illustrator. She has like mad skills. It's worth noting that her husband is a designer and educator. He has incredible skills when it comes to design. They are both very detail-oriented. I got to see some behind the scenes of how they're designing this and, all of that. And it was just kind of inspiring, just the level of detail and care that went into it. But it wasn't just them. It wasn't just two people who loved a cat. Their architect was involved. And you can imagine if you're bringing an architect in to design a home in Brooklyn, this is someone working at a very high level. And they helped with the overall design of the litter box area. Then they brought their carpenter in, who was really designing all of the shelving in the pantry. And Lori had a great quote where she said, "Carpenters are true artists and masters of functionality," and that their carpenter helped them tweak the design in ways they never would have thought of, which is interesting. Then, of course, the plumbers were involved because it's right next to the laundry area, so they had to really, really design the piping in specific ways and redo work when, as they're building it, they had to kind of make some adjustments. And I was trying in my head to think about not just cost of material, which, by the way, we know is very high for everything right now, but I wonder how many hours went into this by each person and then what their hourly rate would be as a professional. But I couldn't get there. That information's almost unknowable. And I was hesitant to put really a number on it, even for writing about this, because I didn't want it to seem over the top in a way that seemed too much, because I really love the intention that went into this. But it made me think that, yeah, this is work and this is expensive if you really care about what you do. But the bigger lesson for me here was that if you want to really focus on building your craft, and for you, maybe it's I want to write a really good book, but then I want to share it, and sharing is a craft. Having collaborators is a critical part of you having success as a professional, even if you feel like this is like a little hobby for you, your creative work. One of the surest ways to failure is to try to do everything by yourself all the time, to not share, to not be open. And this can look like a lot of things for different people. Maybe you create your work in isolation, but the way you share it involves other people, or the way you publish it, or how you invest yourself in the community. Recently I wrote about the power of outreach, and I talked about, gratitude emails is just one simple way of doing that. And the lesson here for me is, even if it seems like your work is just your work, even if sometimes you think, I'm a small fish in a big pond, or if you think, well, it's my work, don't be afraid to have collaborators. If Lori and her husband can involve not just their own talents, but these other professionals in the design of this, what is it, a 3 foot by 4 foot litter box area, and spend so many months designing it, your work deserves that same kind of collaboration and attention. All right. I want to thank Lori for allowing me to share this story. You can go to wegrowmedia.com and go to the blog to find some photos. You can go to Lori on her Instagram and find images as well. It's Lori, Lori, Lori Richmond Draws on Instagram. She has some renovation highlights in her stories up top. And yeah, I love stories like this, and this is where the intersection of design and sharing is so intriguing to me. All right, you can find me at wegrowmedia.com and on Instagram and Twitter at Dan Blank. All right, everyone, thank you so much for listening until the end.